patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. And welcome to another episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski. Thank you so much for joining us today, for tuning into this show. I really appreciate all of your support. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. Again, I really appreciate all the help that you've been giving me. Today, I've got a very special guest with me, a history person, but also someone who I think is able to engage people with history. I think that's one of the most important aspects of getting to know our country's history and be able to get involved to some degree of that active learning. And I'm just so excited to welcome our guest today, Matt Beat. Matt Beat is a high school social studies teacher, video producer, podcaster, and musician based out of Kansas. He has taught various subjects in the classroom from grades 7 to 12 for more than 10 years. His YouTube channels, Mr. Beat and The Beat Goes On, have accumulated more than 350,000 subscribers and 39 million views, helping expand his classroom to around the world. Beat's specialty is American history, but he also has a big passion for geography and economics. He has a band called Electric Needle Room, which is both known for original indie pop songs about all of the American presidents. Matt co-hosts an iHeartMedia podcast called Jobsolete. Finally, he is a coffee snob who unironically wears khaki shorts. Man, I tell you, that's quite a bio. 350,000, just for context for all of you out there, that's about the population of Honolulu, Hawaii. So it's quite amazing, Matt, what you have built. And thank you so much for coming on to Friends and Fellow Citizens.
Thanks for having me on, Sherman.
Well, I want to get started by learning a bit more about your background in teaching. I mean, you're a teacher, as noted in the bio. Tell us how you got started in teaching.
Well, it wasn't my first career. I actually first studied journalism, and I was in TV and radio for a couple of years, not that long before I realized I didn't want to do that because it was kind of, the industry was changing in a way that I didn't like. So I went to this, I just kind of got a job as a valet manager, and I was working with a lot of young folks as in that role. And I was like, man, I really enjoy like how enthusiastic and positive younger people are, like, and compared to like older people who are more cynical and jaded. I know teenagers usually have a reputation as being jaded, but I didn't get that impression. And, you know, I've always loved social studies. Especially American history, American political history in particular, and geography and economics. And so, yeah, I went back to school and got an education degree and later a master's in history. And it's technically my third career. And meanwhile, I've made videos all along. So that kind of was a natural thing, you know, because with my journalism background. And so,
I mean, you know, I think one of the things that I really love about your content is that you really make it seem very natural. You know, I think that's one of the things that we need more nowadays is be able to connect with history, right? To be able to realize that it's not just a series of events of the past. There's a meaning to it. There are people who made that history. And so I wanted to ask you, so you made these videos. Why did you decide to grow the channel to where it is now? I mean, certainly there's been quite a bit of investment on your part, you know, being able to put together all these videos and all these subjects. So what made you want to grow it to something as big as it is nowadays?
Well, when I started the channel, I had no ambition whatsoever to do anything like this. Like I first, you mentioned my band, Electric Needle Room. I started a YouTube channel for the band, like way back in 2006, the early days of YouTube. but it was not something I ever took that seriously. And I posted some educational videos for my own students in real life for the classroom on my personal channel. They were never meant to be seen by a wider audience. And somehow they were. Like, teachers started showing them to their students. I'm like, well, shoot, if other teachers are using these, maybe I'll start making more of them. But it would be many years before I started actually taking it seriously, because teaching is hard. It's like it takes up a lot of time. And ultimately what happened was, like, I used to coach. I used to have other side gigs, because every teacher has at least a second or third or fourth job. um, it's like I was a wedding DJ also. But anyway, eventually the videos became the second job, and now it's actually a huge part of my life. And I never would have thought that would have happened. It's just kind of weird. It just accidentally happened. So
it kind of reminds me of that story about Khan Academy. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's basically, yeah. So the founder, Sal Khan, created videos initially for his cousin, because his cousin was struggling to learn a particular subject, and he was in a hedge fund of some kind, and so he never thought that it would grow to what it is. But look at where he is now, and I just bring that up because I think this is amazing. What's so amazing about creating content, which is, you never think that it's gonna get anywhere. If you like myself, I was gonna be happy that 10 people were gonna listen to it once and say that they listened to a podcast by me. But
yeah.
To be able to create content, I think you obviously know it as well. This is very rewarding for us, which is one of the reasons why I love connecting with people and connecting with listeners, and about all these subjects. A little bit about the political history. I think this is so interesting because we get so caught up, I think, on current events and what's happening every single day. I feel like, nowadays, as of April 2021, it feels very different in many ways compared to, say, April 2020, when you had the Trump administration. And I'm not, people can have their own perspectives on the Trump administration. I'm just saying the media climate it felt like it was just nonstop for 4 years, even probably even longer than that. So what made you kind of go to the route of political history, kind of going back to the old days, going back to the Washington administration or the Civil War, and bring those subjects to light here in this day and age?
Well, I've just always been fascinated, in particular, with these politicians who. What's so unique about the United States is that it was founded by, yeah, sure, they were all wealthy elites of the time, but at the same time, none of them were royalty, and they actually, what they said was more important, which was like, because obviously they talked better than they walked, because many of them had slaves and other stuff. So yeah, but what they were saying was like, no, it should be, everybody should have a voice. Everybody should have the pursuit of happiness and the equality, all this. The fact that ordinary folks a lot of times are elevated in these positions to be public servants, to be sent to Washington, D.C. and represent their constituents. I don't know. For some reason, that's always meant a lot to me since a very young age, and it's particularly the presidency. Like, it is amazing to me how, like, I mean, sure, most of the people who have been president were powerful people before, but it's amazing how, like, the office is just so respected. Like, whereas one day it's just like a guy, and the next day it's like, whoa, the president, like, and everything about it. And I used to memorize the presidents when I was in grade school. I was like one of those kids. I had all every president book out there that was made for kids. I had it, and I made my my own. So I've always, for some reason, and I know, like, it's kind of sad because that's the history that's often taught in school, when we should teach more of the non-political history. But it's just what I like.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the memorization of the U.S. presidents. When I first memorized all of them, there were 43 presidents at that time. And luckily, when it comes to presidents, every 4 to 8 years, there's only one more you have to remember. So I believe that I will remember all the presidents for the rest of my life. That's one of my big life commitments. I want to go back a bit further. We mentioned about your interest in U.S. political history. Let's go back to the Washington administration. President Washington really set a lot of precedents, but I don't think he really had to set those precedents, did he?
Oh, yeah.
Given the fact that he was so revered and the fact that he was so popular, he could have had anything he wanted. What are your thoughts about the impact of George Washington becoming the first president and setting an institution up that would last all the way up to the present day and for many, many years to come?
Yeah, you put it well already, but I that's actually the thing that I'm most impressed with Washington more than anything is his humility. That is what I think seems to be lost on a lot of politicians over the years. Is like they forget who they started out as, because Washington wasn't always like this glorified person. He even had a rocky start as a military leader, like in the French and Indian War, like and even in the Revolutionary War, like he was losing battle after battle. This is, but yeah. So at the time when everybody's thinking that, like, you're like the most popular man in this new country and you could easily be king, he's like, no. I compare it to, if any of your listeners are fans of Lord of the Rings, like Frodo with the ring, like it's so easy just to hold on to that ring and hold on to that power. But no, like Washington throws that ring into the volcano. I'm not even that well versed on Lord of the Rings, but yeah, like he could have had it all, and he's just like, no. And they kept, and he didn't want to be president, and they're like, finally he's like, okay, it's my duty, I'll do it. He didn't want to run for re-election. All right, fine, I'll run for another. And then finally, the third time's like, no, I'm done. And you know what? No one else should do this either. Yeah, so that is single-handedly the most impressive thing about Washington.
That's a good characterization of Washington. Washington just come out and saying, I'm done. I've had my thing. I might have my 8 years. I want to go back to Mount Vernon. See you later. And the see you later, in a way, was disguised as a farewell address. I guess that was his way of offering a quote unquote third term, which is a notable speech telling people what he learned and the things that we have to remember as we move forward as a country. I want to now shift gears a bit into something more specific within the Washington administration. It's really about the challenges. We mentioned the popularity of Washington, but he did encounter a lot of challenges. One of those was the Whiskey Rebellion, which was essentially farmers in the country were very upset at a tax on whiskey in an efforts for the federal government to raise some revenue, because there was quite a bit of debt going around here in this country after the American Revolution. So, Matt, what are your impressions about the importance of the Whiskey Rebellion and how Washington's handling of such an insurrection was critical to establishing a norm of federal responsibility, but also a kind of stability for a new nation?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it was. Like, it was a tax on whiskey and other spirits, and this was, I think, 1790 or 1791, one of those 2 years it was passed. And so it started out as these smaller protests, but then kind of grew into this widespread thing that really was creating a lot of instability in Western Pennsylvania. And so this is where we first see George Washington take decisive action to say, you know what, this is bigger than us. Okay, we are all here for the Constitution and for limited government, but it has to function. And at a basic level, as we saw with Shays' Rebellion just a few years before that, we've been here before already. And so he, I think, swiftly took action for that and actually set a good example by going out there himself. Actually, I think still to this day, it's the only president who was out on the battlefield, so to speak. That wasn't really a battlefield, but he was, as they were rounding up people who were causing turmoil out there. He was nearby. So
I can't imagine the memes. If memes were a thing at that time, see if someone take a video of Washington going into I guess Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, or wherever the rebels were. I would love to see that. I would love to see that trending on social media.
yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to point out was about foreign relations. This is a really tricky one because everyone knows about Lafayette, about the French support that they gave us during the American Revolution, but things got a little crazy in France. I should say they were crazy, and things are still crazy nowadays. Maybe maybe not necessarily in the form of a monarchy per se, but I do think it's pretty fascinating to see how much turmoil there is in French politics in so many ways. But things kind of got a little crazy there, and we kind of saw some divisions going on. There's kind of the pro-British side and the pro-French side, and Washington had to really handle some of these things, right? So what can you tell us about maybe some of the challenges on foreign policy when it came to dealing with the French, but also dealing with the British at the same time?
Yeah, that's another area where Washington, I think, took the right approach. Where he always sought balance between the two, because he could quickly see, like, where he could see how these factions were quickly developing. The pro-French folks like Jefferson. I mean, even in his own cabinet, the pro-British folks like Adams or Hamilton, and then Jay Treaty was I think it's underrated as a treaty, frankly, because we're looking at like just a few years after the Revolutionary War, and they're already like they're being realistic. I mean, sure, we can look down the road with the War of 1812 and how things got bad again, but I think kind of ignoring those impulses to be anti-British and like at least work with them, because realize they were still the the imperial power of the world. But at the same time, France kind of maintaining a pretty good relationship with them. It wasn't perfect. We had issues at sea, and of course the French Revolution. We didn't want to like endorse it because obviously it got out of control. So, but yeah, balance. Back to that word, like trying to, and like I get criticized all the time on my channel I'm the enlightened centrist guy who's like, oh, well, you're just trying to like make both sides happy, or like, and both sides end up being angry. But no, I don't think that's the case. A lot of times, if you have a president who's willing to work with two opposing sides, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be messy, but I think it's ultimately better.
Right. You're absolutely right. Imagining, the foreign policy challenges. I mean, even just imagining, I can't imagine like just in the early years of the administration actually coming up with what U.S. foreign policy is. I mean, where do you start? where do you start?
Well, you start with the fact that we are weak, and like we need to like be very careful. We don't. Yeah, we just started out, guys. Don't mess this up.
You mentioned the French Revolution earlier. Yeah, I can imagine. In the beginning, there was so much support for the anti-establishment kind of cause, everything. And then when the Robespierres and those folks started showing up, you can imagine the colonists be like, "Whoa, okay, this is not where we were supposed to be going. I thought this was going to be a little bit smoother, but." I think we learned a lot about France and those years, that those lessons still carry on to this day, maybe. But
yeah.
I mean, there's so many things about Washington administration. We unfortunately don't have time to cover every single aspect of it, but just in general, Matt, I want to ask you, what do you think is generally the legacy of the Washington administration as a whole, if you include the cabinet members, Hamilton, Jefferson, even despite their differences and their clashing, I think in a way, I think Jefferson and Hamilton would prefer to work from home rather than work in the office, probably. Um, but what do you think is the legacy of the first presidential administration we've ever had in this country?
I think it's what we strive to be. We've been trying to get back to that point ever since, frankly. Um, because he is somebody that just brought everyone together. He was the perfect man for the perfect time. And I know that's cliche to say, but he set so many precedents that are really the glue that kind of keep us together. And he warned us of the stuff that is keeping us apart, mostly partisan politics. And I think we still can learn a lot by him. You know, we don't. It's funny how like no matter where people are politically today, like almost everybody's like, yeah, George Washington was great. Of course, who doesn't love George Washington? Because he's the founder of the country. He's the father of the country. But at the same time, like it's lip service for I think because like for many because we're not actually listening to what he said, what he warned about, and uh, so you know I think it's I like to say that he set so many precedents that we stick by, but we don't stick by all of them.
You know, that's unfortunately true, and in many ways an understatement for this day and age. And since the farewell address is such a central part of this podcast and of the history of this nation, in your view, what is the purpose of the farewell address?
Well, the good news is it's still in curriculums across the country. It's like one of the foundational documents. Like a lot of students are kind of forced to learn about his farewell address, so that's good. But yeah, outside of the classroom, I think it doesn't get enough attention for sure. But I think the fact that he, I guess, kind of going to what I was saying earlier, was that he could kind of see the direction the country was going in a short amount of time. And I think the fact that it was essentially, it's like, in some ways it is a little naive, like, cause he's calling for things that maybe aren't realistic, in a quickly dynamic world that we live in. But at the same time, it doesn't mean I still view it as a very, idealistic, address, a speech. Like, that's doesn't mean I don't like it. I love it. It's, yeah, but it's something we still have to strive for. A lot of what he said.
Yes, and that's why I try my best to tune into the C-SPAN when they put out the farewell address, which is read by either the Republicans and the Democrats. They alternate between years. They still do in the Senate. I believe they used to do in the House, but they've discontinued for some reason. I want to have a talk with the House leadership about that personally, because they should try to keep up with the Senate about this on this historic tradition. So Matt, I want go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's I'm just so surprised though. I didn't even know they were still doing that. Honestly, I had no idea. But my first reaction is like, do they not actually understand what they're reading? Because like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, have they actually really thought about what they're reading? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. You bring up a really good point. Honestly, I mean, they're doing all this reading, but it's no use reading something when you're not actually putting it into practice, or at least advocate for it, at least tell people to tune in to this reading. I don't know how many people actually sit in the Senate chamber to listen to it, but hopefully it's more than one. And the one being the reader of the farewell address. So, real quick now, I want to dive into civics. So civics education has really been central, something that I've been hammering, but also some other guests on this show have been very, very adamant of getting our young kids to be engaged in civics. According to the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, they did a survey saying that up to about 3/4 of young people, we're talking about probably aged 18 to 35, I believe, who can't even pass a civics test. They get an F. It's really astonishing. So, Matt, how do we get more students and kids engaged in civics? This is a major problem, isn't it, for our democracy?
Well, it's the same issue I have in the classroom with a lot of my students is getting them to care. And I think as social studies teachers, we need to bear that responsibility. We need to get our kids excited, and that's one reason why I make the videos. Is I try to make it more relevant. At the very least, like if it's something that is hard to make relevant, I at least make it somewhat entertaining and throw in some bad jokes. uh, but I think, yeah, like the way I was taught, social studies in general, it was a lot of like not connecting it to my life. It was just like copy these notes down and don't critically think much. Just and don't actually use the information that you're getting. A lot of times, I want my students to use what they're getting. Like I have an activity where because I teach American government right now, and I have them write letters or emails typically, but I will actually print out the letters and mail them to local government leaders, whether it be city council, the mayor, or the county. Like this is something I think they start to get into a little bit because they're like, oh, you mean like maybe I can get that pothole fixed that's on my street or and so I think that's where I noticed that I got more into this stuff, like in terms of like actual policies and the more boring stuff, I guess. When I started paying taxes, that's when I started getting more into it, and I noticed that, like you said, 18 to 35. My hope is that once they realize like where their money is actually going, they'll start seeking out this information and maybe stumble across maybe some of my videos and others who've made videos. At least that's the silver lining here is that we live in a time where it's easy to look this stuff up. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you mentioned your experiences in the classroom and writing letters. What kinds of responses have you been getting from either from local leaders or people around the school community about the kinds of things that you're trying to do to get people involved, to really get people involved literally within their communities?
It's usually a pretty good response. I mean, it's a small town. It's probably about it's less than 6,000 people where I teach. So they're pretty responsive, and typically it's stuff though that like like I'll get a lot of students that they want a Taco Bell or something built in town. So it's not something that's necessarily high on a priority, but at least they actually do read them, and I communicate with them, and it's I think rewarding for both sides.
As a content creator yourself, getting engaged in U.S. political history, how do you get people excited and engaged with some of these topics that might seem mundane at first, but can be very, very enjoyable for such a broad audience that you cater to in your videos?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess just tell good stories. I try to tell good stories and make them somewhat engaging. It also has to do with choosing stuff that I know that they're going to care about already. Like, a lot of my students and myself included care a lot about TikTok. And so that was a great way to have a discussion in class last fall when we were talking about how, for a little while there, TikTok was in danger of not being available to download as an app in the United States. And they were totally on board with that. So like you have to find the right topic a lot of times. And, but really though, it's like, it's not that hard. There's so many things that you can connect. It's kind of like this Kevin Bacon thing. Was it 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? You can connect things pretty easily.
Very good. Very good. Good stuff. Let's turn to something that's on everybody's minds, which is how do we get to this era of hyperpartisanship? Any thoughts about how we got here and the implications of such an environment?
Well, for starters, I think you already know that we're very tribal as a as a species, and so we you find your team. Well, first you find your identity, but then after your identity is kind of established, like okay, where's my people at? Because we're social creatures, and then then you're pretty much like kind of stuck, and that's the reason why like when you see family members that disagree on politics, it hits harder because like you see two tribes basically, like, and there's like this betrayal, like how could you betray me? And so I think it requires us, if we want our civilization to move forward, we're going to have to get beyond our tribal instincts. And we can still actually be tribal in terms of just like the human race as a whole. Because I always bring up the example of, and I think Ronald Reagan brought this up too. He's like, if so, I'm probably stealing it from him. But if aliens came to invade the planet, we would quickly learn how to unite. I
Yes.
think, and even us in like China. So yeah, I think we have to get beyond that, and it's so easy to kind of get trapped into our team mentality. I would say we are living in historically divided times. But still, yeah, it was worse in the 1850s for sure. Like 1850s is comparable, but there's no denying that it was worse because you saw violence, like more than the Capitol riot, which obviously was alarming, but we're talking violence even within the House chamber. Somebody getting beaten by a cane almost to death. And so like stuff like that. And, John Brown out in Kansas, where I live, not too far from where I'm at, actually, lots of violence just because of the two teams. They're arguing about a political issue. And it's, I think other than that though, like, yeah, it's a little scary. I like to think that we're over that now. I do see we're reaching like a turn at least. I'm hoping.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. With regards to John Brown, okay, there's this meme from Michael Jordan. I can't make the best impression of him, but it's along the lines of, stop it. Get some help. That I believe could be applied to the 1850s in general, but especially people like John Brown. Crazy, crazy times. In regards to the sources of these hyper-partisan times, what do you think is behind a lot of this shouting and name-calling? Well, it seems like all the names in the dictionaries is completely being thrown out. What is going on here? Why are people acting like this, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we can't forget what the definition of politics really is, which the way I define it is it's how power is distributed. So at its heart, it's about power. And if people feel powerless, then that's when they get really worked up. And so I think that we have so many people in our country right now that feel powerless. But the problem is they blame different people for them feeling powerless. And so, and it's always easier just to blame a group or a person as opposed to actually be proactive and solve a problem. And so like, especially when we got bills to pay and, we're busy working 50, 60 hours a week. So, yeah, I think we need to, instead of, a lot of times I always say, we don't, instead of attacking each other, we need to attack the systems that we have in place. And we have some good systems that we need to keep, but we also have some bad systems that have developed as a byproduct. And so that's what we need to all be angry at, is the systems.
Wholeheartedly agree. Can't argue with that, honestly. Any solutions you think would be best if people are in a situation where there's a lot of tension, a lot of bickering going on? Any way to tamper down the tension and the temperature in the room, so to speak?
Oh yeah, man, that's a tough one. But I think the most important thing is they're learning as many different perspectives as possible. I think that's something that I think a lot about because I was a fairly sheltered person growing up. I had a loving family and it was good overall, but I still felt like once I was outside of my little cocoon, I was like, oh wow, I didn't know about all this. And so like I'm trying, like I have a couple daughters and I'm trying to raise them in a way where they're at least encountering new things regularly. And I feel like that's where you get more empathy and empathy is at the root here. Like if we don't have empathy, then you don't have anything else. So that's what, because you can, like, if you disagree with somebody politically, that's great, but it's not great if you, like you were saying earlier, result to just automatically shutting them out of your life or name calling. And empathy is like, oh, like I need to ignore my own ego and actually listen to what you have to say, and then maybe together we can work something out. So,
Amen. Amen. As we start to wrap up our episode today, Matt, we've had a wonderful conversation, and I want to close with a couple more questions for you. And as one of the traditions on Friends and Fellow Citizens, we reflect on the 6 pillars of the farewell address: patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, and civility. Can you pick maybe 2 or 3 of these values and how you think they line up and apply to the things we talked about today and some of the things that you believe in your own life as well?
Yeah, I think, those are all very important values. I think of those, I would probably, the 2 that stand out to me, well, maybe 3, I guess. Can I say 3?
Sure, go ahead. Pick 3.
Okay. Obviously, education. Being a teacher, I think that you probably, I'm probably preaching to the choir right now, but civics in general has not been given the same priorities as it used to. Like the last 20 years, there's been a push for STEM and STEAM. For those who don't know the acronyms, that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Yeah, and you add art for the STEAM. Anyway, and so I think we need to bring those back, bring back more civic education. It just, like, it really is a lower priority in most schools across the country right now. The next value that I was going to point out from his farewell address, which is national unity, because I think a lot of the division also comes from, we can't even get on the same page as far as like facts about the founding of the country and like why we have the system in place that we do for our form of government, and just really, we have lots of Americans walking around that don't even know the Bill of Rights. And so if we all together know our Bill of Rights, then I think that will help tremendously. And the other value of his farewell address, civility, which goes back to what we were saying earlier. I think I'm trying to remember exactly what he said with civility, but he was obviously against political parties, and he was thinking that this was what our enemies wanted us to be, constantly bickering about petty things, but we saw how nasty the election of 1800 got right after. This is like a year or 2 after Washington's death. And that's exactly what he did not want, personal attacks constantly on people that are just trying to do the right thing for the country.
Excellent choices, Matt. Really, really spectacular. And could you share a little bit about, as a final question, and could you share a bit about maybe some of the ways in which you apply some of these values in your own life? Is something you'd like to share with the audience on that?
Yeah, just treat people with respect. I know it sounds kind of obvious, but like, it doesn't matter who it is. Like, no, you're like, whoever's listening to this right now, you're not better than anybody, and nobody's better than you. We all poop, So like, sorry to throw that at you, but yeah, like, it's like, we're all human beings and we all have good contributions. As a teacher, I don't think people, like, in terms of like intelligence, I think intelligence is misunderstood generally. Like, most people are intelligent at different things. Like, and so I think everybody has some kind of value, and we need to open our mind to that. Like, and it starts with humility, and it also it goes back to empathy. That's what it all starts out with. So
Wonderful. About the respect thing, I've been calling you Matt in this entire episode, but there's been times when I'd be like, I need to call Mr. Beat. That's Mr. Beat. Got
You
it.
don't have to. It's all right.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for coming on to Friends and Fellow Citizens. You've brought up so many incredible points, especially about humility and empathy. Boy, we really do need that, and we've got a foundation for that in our American history. And I'm so glad you pointed that out through your description and your analysis of the Washington administration. I also want to really express my thanks to you for the content that you create on YouTube. Being able to get countless people more engaged in American history and political history and the civics part of America. This is what it's all about. It's about getting more people involved, but doing so that is going to be beneficial for the direction of our country. And I just want to express my appreciation for you on that. I also need to check out some more of your content. Again, and I'll be sure to link the YouTube channel and some other links down the show notes for the audience. So for those who are listening, make sure to check out those links at the end of this episode. I'll have to take a listen to your music. I did not know you actually recorded music, but hopefully it'll give me a bit of a beat to my step, so to speak, when I walk to work or something. I can look forward to that. But Matt, again, thank you so much for being on Friends and Fellow Citizens.
Well, thanks for saying all those nice things, and yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Matt. Well, Friends and Fellow Citizens listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to check out our episodes every single week on Mondays. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Take care.